There's an electric car on the market right now that costs $10,000. Not a golf cart, not a toy. A real car with 4 doors, air conditioning, a touchscreen, and a 300-kilometer range. And the CEOs of Ford and General Motors have publicly said they're worried about it. That's not normal. These are companies that have survived a century of competition, oil crises, financial crashes, and technological revolutions. They don't usually admit fear, but here they are, on earnings calls and in interviews, saying the same thing over and over. China's EV cost structure is something we can't ignore. So what's actually happening here? Because the easy answer is that it's cheap. And that's true. But cheap doesn't explain why it's cheap. It doesn't explain how a country can sell electric cars for less than most people spend on a used sedan, while companies in the US and Europe say they're losing money on every EV they make. It doesn't explain why this car is now showing up in markets that were supposed to be locked down by established brands. And it definitely doesn't explain why the subsidies that supposedly made this possible are being cut, and the prices are still falling. This isn't just about one car. It's about a strategy that started 20 years ago, stayed quiet while everyone else was focused on Tesla, and is now reshaping the global auto industry in a way that most people still don't fully understand. Because the $10,000 car isn't the story, it's the outcome. And the story behind it is something very different. Let's start with the numbers, because they reveal something that sounds impossible. China sells 8 to 9 million electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles every year. That's more than the total number of cars, of any kind, sold in most countries. Globally, about 14 to 15 million EVs are sold each year. That means more than half of every electric car sold on the planet is sold in China. Not made in China. Sold in China to Chinese customers. In Chinese cities, a few years ago, EVs made up 5 or 6% of new car sales in China. Today, that number is over 30%. In some months, it hits 40%. That means that if you walk into a car dealership in Shanghai or Shenzhen, 3 or 4 out of every 10 cars being sold are electric. That's not a niche. That's not early adopters. That's mainstream. And here's the part that matters. When you make that many cars, the cost per unit drops. It's called economies of scale, and it's not new. But what China did with that principle is new. They didn't just scale up production. They've scaled up everything. The battery factories, the motor plants, the chip suppliers, the lithium processing facilities, the charging networks, the entire system. Because here's what most people miss. In other countries, a car company makes the car. They buy the battery from someone else. They buy the motor from someone else. They import the chips, the software, the rare earth materials. If any one of those suppliers has a problem, the whole production line stops. And every time you add a middleman, you add cost. China decided early on that if the future was going to be electric, they needed to control the whole chain, not just assemble the car. Control the chain. And that decision, made quietly in policy rooms 15 years ago, is the reason a $10,000 EV exists today. Let's talk about what that actually means. To build an electric car, you need lithium, nickel, cobalt, graphite. You need to refine those materials into battery-grade chemicals. You need to manufacture the cells. You need to assemble those cells into a battery pack. Then you need the electric motor, the power electronics, the control systems, the wiring, the software. Each of those is a separate industry. China decided early on that if the future was going to be electric, they needed to control the whole chain, not just assemble the car. Control the chain. And that decision, made quietly in policy rooms 15 years ago, is the reason a $10,000 EV exists today. Let's talk about what that actually means. To build an electric car, you need lithium, nickel, cobalt, graphite. You need to refine those materials into battery-grade chemicals. You need to manufacture the cells. You need to assemble those cells into a battery pack. Then you need the electric motor, the power electronics, the control systems, the wiring, the software. Each of those is a separate industry. In most countries, those industries are scattered. The lithium comes from Australia or Chile. It gets refined in China. The cells are made in Korea or Japan. The motors come from Germany. The software is written in Silicon Valley. Every handoff adds time, cost, and risk. China built all of it domestically. The mines are overseas, yes, but the refining happens in China. 70 to 80% of the world's lithium, nickel, and cobalt refining happens in Chinese facilities. The battery cell factories are in China. The motor manufacturers are in China. The chip makers, the software developers, the assembly plants, all in the same ecosystem. When a factory in Shenzhen needs a battery pack, the supplier is 2 hours away. When they need a motor, it's in the same province. When there's a software update, the team is in the same time zone. There are no shipping delays, no tariffs, no currency fluctuations, no language barriers. Everything runs on the same grid, the same logistics network, the same regulatory framework. This is why, when the global supply chain collapsed during the pandemic, Chinese EV companies barely slowed down. Everyone else was waiting for chips from Taiwan or batteries from Korea. Chinese companies just kept building, and that's when the gap started to become visible. Not because China got better, because everyone else got stuck. But there's something deeper happening here, and it's something people don't talk about enough. It has to do with the battery. Because the battery is where the money is. In a traditional car, the engine is maybe 15 to 20% of the total cost. In an electric car, the battery is 30 to 40%, sometimes more. That means if you can make the battery cheaper, you can make the whole car cheaper. And China made a choice that no one else wanted to make. They bet everything on LFP, lithium iron phosphate. It's a battery chemistry that was around for years, but most companies ignored it. Tesla used it in some vehicles. BYD used it. But the premium brands, the luxury EVs, the long-range models, they all used NMC batteries. Nickel, manganese, cobalt. Higher energy density, longer range, better performance. Also more expensive and less stable. LFP batteries are cheaper because they don't use cobalt or nickel, which are expensive and often sourced from unstable regions. They're safer because the chemistry is more stable, less prone to thermal runaway. They last longer, more charge cycles before degradation, but they have lower energy density. That means for the same range, you need a bigger, heavier battery. So China said, fine, we'll take the lower range. We'll make the battery a little bigger, but we'll make it cheap, safe, and long-lasting, and we'll make millions of them. That decision is the reason the $10,000 car exists, because when you remove cobalt and nickel from the equation, and you manufacture the cells at scale, the cost per kilowatt-hour drops dramatically. And when the battery gets cheaper, the whole car gets cheaper. It's not magic, it's just math. But here's the part that should make everyone uncomfortable. This strategy only matters once you see what happened next, because these cars didn't stay in China. They started showing up in other countries, first in Southeast Asia, then Latin America, then Europe, and not as luxury imports, as affordable, everyday vehicles. The kind of car a taxi driver in Bangkok or a delivery worker in Santiago might actually buy. In Latin America, the shift has been fast. Countries like Brazil, Mexico, Chile, they're seeing Chinese EVs flood the market. Not because of subsidies, because of price. A new middle class is forming in these countries, and they want cars. But they don't want to spend $40,000. They want something reliable, modern, and cheap to run. A $10,000 or $15,000 EV fits that perfectly. Europe is more complicated. There are tariffs, there are safety regulations, there are established brands with loyal customers. But even in Europe, Chinese EVs are gaining ground because energy prices are high, because governments are pushing electrification, and because if you can buy an electric car for 25,000 euros instead of 40, a lot of people will consider it. The impact isn't hypothetical anymore. It's measurable. European automakers are cutting prices. They're delaying new models. They're lobbying for tariffs. That only happens when the threat is real. And in Asia, in countries like Thailand, Indonesia, India, the story is just beginning. These are markets where most people are buying their first or second car. They're not loyal to Ford or Toyota yet. They just want something that works and doesn't cost a fortune to fuel. If an EV becomes as cheap as a petrol car and electricity is cheaper than gas, the choice becomes obvious. So now the question everyone is asking, is this dumping? Are Chinese companies selling at a loss just to grab market share, planning to raise prices later once the competition is dead? Maybe. But here's the thing, the subsidies are ending. The Chinese government, which used to pay part of the purchase price for every EV sold, has been cutting those subsidies for years. In many cities, they're gone entirely. and yet the prices keep falling. If this were just a subsidy game, that wouldn't be possible. What's actually happening is that the scale has become self-sustaining.